There we go. Now we're recording. All right. Well, everything up to this point has been pretty basic. So let's pick up where we left off here. So we were looking at sort order. We switched that over to descending by changing that Z to A. And then there's another feature that automatically puts in. I don't typically end up using this, but it automatically puts in this nulls first or nulls last. So if we had a contact record that did not have a last name, if that's even possible, it would choose to put that either first or last. In fact, let's see if we can force that here. So I'll go ahead and drop in an ID so that I have something I can click on. Now that I've got that, we'll hover over that. Oh, you know what? Let's use that update function here. Let's play with something else while we have our window open. Update. So it nicely takes me over to this form where I can go ahead and start changing values right in Workbench. And I'll go ahead and delete that first name and confirm the update. And I get a link to see that. But let's go back to our query now. And it saved it. I'll go ahead and switch this over to first name. Put nulls first. And now when we run it, oh, look at that. Andy's name stayed. What the heck? Is it just lingering? All right, well, let's see if I can force that another way. And there we go. So it's important to remember, never use Workbench to update. It's unpredictable. Well, I can't guarantee that. I've actually had good luck with it in the past. Not sure what happened here, but we're not going to waste time troubleshooting that. All right, a couple other things we have here that help you build your query. I can tell it to only return a set number of records. And as soon as I populate that, it pops in the limit keyword along with the integer value for the number of records that I want back. And now we just get 10 records back. This one you do end up using a fair amount in your queries. You often want to control the number you get back, and you often use it along with the sorts because you might just want to get, say, the 10 oldest records from a particular table. The other function that's nice and something that, now all of this you could copy right into Developer Console. So if I were to take this and flip over to my Developer Console, I could put that same thing right in there, execute it.
We don't see a Developer Console.
Oh, you don't?
No, it seems like it's refreshing very slowly for some reason.
Well, I'll see. I'll leave it here for a second, see if we get our refresh going back here. Check my screen share, make sure it's still it's sharing the desktop, it says.
Yeah, it's just refreshing extremely slow suddenly.
Well, if you could see the Developer Console, right now I'm just seeing the same list in the Developer Console.
Okay, now it popped up, the Developer Console, and now we can see the list. There we go.
Ah, thank you, Ohad.
We're live.
So we are able to use the same queries in here. You just have to know how to build them. It will not give you any helpful autocomplete. But it does have some of the same functions for being able to highlight a row and to access it. We see along our query, along this bottom bar, we have a couple of different options. But what I wanted to point out that we can only do in Workbench, that we cannot do in Developer Console, is to access records in our recycle bin. So hopefully the refresh has happened on your end, and you can see the
we can see it. We can see it.
So here we have our couple of radio buttons called Deleted and Archived Records. By default, it's set on exclude, so that means we're not going to see any records in our recycle bin, or in the case of tasks, we're not going to see archived tasks. But we can use the include, and it doesn't actually change the query. But when we do it, it would return any deleted records. So well, let's delete a record here to put something into our recycle bin. And I'll take my limit off of there because I want to make sure we see that we also get back Mr. No Name Young. And that's only coming back because we had opened up the query to includes. And there is a way in SOQL to directly write that. And if you were doing it in Apex or in some other tools, you use the all rows keyword. But for whatever reason, Developer Console just does not like that keyword. And if I try and execute it here, I get the unfriendly unknown error parsing query, which is pretty much the only error the query editor will ever give you and never tell you what exactly is wrong.
Hey, can you do a where is deleted equals true? I've never tried that really.
Yeah, so maybe we can do a workaround here. So I'll do a where keyword, and our where is deleted equals true. Does not look like it is including it here, because it really, that all rows keyword at the end opens up the scope of data that the query is run against. If we were to use that same query back in Developer Console, probably if we exclude it, I'm betting we're not going to get anything. Yeah, no records returned. But if we include it, we get that record back. So there are a lot of other tools out there for doing SOQL queries. Eclipse, the Eclipse IDE has a very nice query builder. If you can get Eclipse installed and running, both Ohad and I tried to do it and failed. And there are a few other third-party tools for writing queries, some of which might give you all of the records deleted or otherwise by default. All right, so we've looked at a lot of the keywords that we can use in our queries. We looked at the select and the from, the two that must be in every query. We took a brief look at where filters and some of their varieties, and the order by to do sorting, and limit to limit the results, and a couple of the comparison operators such as equals or in, and we can also build or types. So we can do or is deleted true, or first name equals rows, and that gets us 2 records back. And I mentioned earlier that while we typically do field names in our select query, there are some alternatives. There are quite a few methods that are available to us, but the one that you'll end up using the most is simply the count method. And when we run that, it just tells us how many records. It gives us an integer return. In fact, it's something we use so often that Workbench conveniently includes that in the list of fields. There are some other ones out there for doing more complex math calculations, but typically the count one is the one that we use most of the time. It's a nice, efficient way if you're in your developer console to get an idea of how many records a query is going to return before you put it in your Apex and have to process 10,000 records.
Hey, look, just a quick interruption. Michael Lupino brought up a good point. He said, I used all rows before. So yeah, all rows does work if you use it from Apex or anonymous Apex. It's just the developer console query window does not accept that for whatever reason. So just to kind of highlight that.
Yeah, and maybe it's something if I'm sure there's an idea on the idea exchange out there.
Yep,
to get
there
it
is.
in there. But well, that actually gives us a good segue into working with Apex a little bit. So I'll go ahead and grab this query, and I'll use my anonymous Apex window here. And I'll make this a little bigger by toggling this arrow key. Now, in anonymous Apex, I can't just drop in a query and have it do anything. If I try that, Apex doesn't know what to do with it. It's not on its own. It doesn't define anything. So as soon as we start working in Apex, we kind of need to tell Apex where it's going to put this data. So as we saw when we were looking at our collections, we can populate a list. So we'll make a list of contacts, call it cons. Not disparaging Mr. Young and Ms. Gonzalez in any way. And we'll go ahead and pop our query into a pair of square brackets because that is the syntax that Apex expects when you are working with a query. You always end up wrapping it in some square brackets. And I can execute this, although it's not going to be very exciting because, well, we don't really see anything here. It just created a list and populated it with that. But let's go ahead and pop a system debug on the next line.
Don't forget to re-enable OpenLog.
Good idea. And I'll, in my system debug, I'll just directly use that list name, like my OpenLog, so it takes us right there. And now when I execute it, we will get over to our logs. I'll click my debug only. And, well, it returned nothing. All right, let's do a little debugging. I expected it to return something. All right, so I did it where isDeleted equals true. And as we saw earlier,
you didn't use the all rows.
I didn't use all rows.
Space between
so
the all space rows as far as I know.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. Thank you. Must have worked. It didn't throw an error. Go to our debug. Hey, and now we've got it. And so when we do return that query result and look at it in a debug, we do get a pattern that is very similar to how we populate our lists. If we were creating a list and populating it, we would see those curly brackets and we'd see the items that are in it. In this case, that the last name is set to Young and the ID is the ID of that record. And if we were to have multiple contacts in here, we'd start to see even more coming in there. So you can start to see the similarities between the debug output and what we write in Apex when you are familiar with those formats. Now the next thing we want to take a look at as we're starting to get into Apex is one more convention that we can use in Apex when building our queries. So often in a query, particularly in your where filter, you might need to create a dynamic query. And that's one where the value that you are perhaps filtering on is going to change. So that is when we start to use this colon to do a variable. So let me go ahead and create a variable up here. I'll create a string, and I'll call it var. And I'll go ahead and populate that with, I better do one that's not deleted. I better spell it right this time. So now I've created a string called var, and populated it with the value Gonzalez. If I want to use this variable instead of the string in my query, I have to put a colon in front of it first. And then I can put that query or that variable in. And now I'm going to be able to run that. Hit the debug. And we can see that it found that particular record. And I was trying to find what that colon is called. I think it might be called a bind
Yes,
element.
that's exactly what it's
Okay.
called. Now, I do want to make a quick comment. You'll notice here that you only queried for first name and last name. But if you go back into your debug log, you'll see that in the returned results, if you don't mind, thank you, you also get the ID. So SOQL queries when you query an object will always return the object's ID as well. That is just actually I guess it's kind of a convenience thing, because whenever you need to do something with this later, you will need to know the ID of the record. So ID is always returned when you do SOQL.
Very good point. In fact, wow, I'm getting a good lightning show out here on the Hudson River.
Yeah, it passed here 10 minutes ago.
All right, so that takes us through our introduction of building the queries and a lot of the various elements that you end up using in those queries. So let's really start rolling this into our Apex a little bit more and pick up with how we end up using these with our collections. So now I'm going over to the worksheet prepared for this week. And if you don't already have it, if you scroll through the chat log, it's one of the first comments that I populated in there, and you'll be able to go over to the GitHub gists and copy that into a class in your developer console.
I'll post it again just in case anybody needs
thank you.
a shortcut. Look, before we jump into this, I kind of just want to kind of summarize something that you've been going over. So SOQL queries are very, very similar in nature to SQL queries, right? So SQL, which is really kind of the origin of where SOQL came from. Just like Apex came from Java, SOQL came from SQL, which is SQL. Even though there are definitely some differences. If anybody here ever worked with SQL, you know that you are able to do select star from and then give a table name. And that will return all the fields in the table, or in our case, the object. With SOQL, that is actually not available. You cannot use star. You have to distinctly identify every field that you are looking to return. So that means that if you are writing some Apex and returning all of the fields that you are looking to work with, and then tomorrow you add another field to the object, you will not be able to handle it in your code without adding it to your SOQL select statement. So there are actually ways around it. We're probably not going to touch on them anytime soon. But there is something called the dynamic SOQL query. If you're interested, I'll shoot you a link, Luke, to explanation how to work with this if anybody here is interested, but I think it's a little more advanced. But then the last thing that I kind of wanted to summarize is the format for a SOQL select query. So just like we saw, and I'm not going to say anything that anybody here hasn't seen yet, but so a select statement always start with the word select. It's telling SOQL, hey, return these values for me, and it will always be followed by a list of fields from the object that you want to query. There are a couple of exceptions, like the count method that Luke mentioned, but overall you will almost always use either count or a list of fields. The list of fields will always be followed by the from keyword, which tells SOQL, hey, you will find these fields in the following table, and then, or in the following object. And then you obviously put the object's name. The object's name will always be followed by one of several things, but the order is also important. So as we saw, if you want to put a filter, we use the where keyword. So we can use where and then give a field value and some restrictive field criteria like last name equals Gonzalez. You can use any combination of ands and ors. So you can say first name equals Rose and last name equals Gonzalez, or last name equals whatever the other Young we had there. But what's important to also understand is that these conditions will apply with, you'll have to actually use parentheses to tell Salesforce SOQL how to apply these ands and ors. So you can actually say something like open parenthesis where, where open parenthesis first name equals Rose and last name equals Gonzalez, close parenthesis, or last name equals Young. So it will actually return any record where the last name is Young, or any record where both the first name is Rose and the last name is Gonzalez. So I hope I'm not going too much, but Luke, thank you for following up with typing what I'm explaining. And then the where clause can be followed by the order by command, which allows us to specify a sort order. And so the sort order will always be after the where command. So even though both of them are after the from object name, if you decide to use a where clause, it has to be right after the from. But you don't have to use a where. You can use order by without using a where. But the order by has to be after the where. And then finally, we have the limit keyword, where you can say only return this many records. And the limit always has to be the last one after the order by. So if you try to do where, whatever, limit 10, order by, that will not actually work. So it's just some little tips about writing your own SOQL queries. If you use Workbench, it will do it for you. But my guess is as you start to get more familiar with this, you'll end up writing SOQL queries yourself. It's very quick and it's very efficient. You don't want to jump to the Workbench every time. So understanding how that works is important. Now, SOQL is as simple as you want it to be and as complicated as you want it to be. So what we discuss now is probably about 90% of the use cases of SOQL queries, meaning almost anything that you'll want to do with SOQL we just discussed, really. But there are definitely some more features to SOQL that make it more advanced that allow you to do some other things. We're not going to really cover them right now, but just know that you can actually get further, deeper into SOQL and learn some more advanced stuff beyond what we're talking about. So that was my summary. Back to you, Luke.
Another nice function that Workbench and Developer Console query editor give is, and using SOQL, is that you can get at a lot of tables that you cannot get at with reports or with tabs in Salesforce. If we look at that drop-down of the objects, we see way more objects than we know we have reports for. So you can also get queries of things like our Apex classes. So if I go up here to Apex class, well, I guess there's a way to see that in setup. So maybe not the best example, but SOQL is applied to just about every table of data that is in Salesforce. So it's a way to see a lot of the other tables that are otherwise difficult to get at. And the last thing to point out here, and forgot to mention this, is that you also have a couple different views. Matrix view is pretty similar to what we have in reports with matrix views there. but it does have a bulk CSV so that you can download a CSV directly from your SOQL query. So it's a substitute for the data loader as a way to get that out. Or it can also put out XML, but if you're getting into downloading XML and using it, you probably don't need to be here in our Apex workshops. All right, back over to our developer console and our worksheet.
Hey, look, just before that, just a quick one.
Sure.
So Michael Lupino just asked if there's any document with some more advanced SOQL examples. So I'll provide something here on the chat.
Oh boy, and how.
Anybody that wants to. Yeah, if you want to look, feel free, but don't let it distract you from what we're doing now because it becomes important.
Yeah, we're looking now at the official documentation for SOQL, and just even a quick view of the table of contents here on the left side.
Well, your page is slow again. Okay, I think we're back to live.
Besides the ones we saw like order by and limit, there are all sorts of other ways you can edit your SOQL queries. There's group by and having and update tracking. I don't know what most of these do because I've never had a reason to use them, but Salesforce keeps rolling out ever more functionality with each release to what you can accomplish with SOQL. And a lot of these become very useful when you start getting more into Visualforce and really need to organize your results very efficiently as part of your query rather than trying to do it once you've got the data back. So you can use a combination of complex SOQL queries with Visualforce to get a really nice set of results back that immediately apply in a Visualforce layout. All right, back into our worksheet here. So one of the first things that you'll notice on line 1 is after our is test annotation that tells Apex this is a test class, we're using see all data equals true. Now that see all data annotation is specific to unit tests. And normally unit tests do not have access to any of our production data. In our unit tests, we have to create all of the data, all of the test data that we're eventually going to attempt to test on. But for the purpose of demonstrating SOQL queries in Apex, I wanted to have some data easily accessible. So I'm using the developer edition's pre-populated data. And by using see all data equals true, that means all of it will be accessible to our unit test. It's a very bad practice to use that when you're writing unit tests for your Apex triggers and classes because production data can change. And if you're trying to test it, your tests might break because somebody changed some of the records.
It also gives you a lot less control over what you're testing.
Right. Yeah, you don't know how many records there are. It's going to change a lot. So by default, see all data is false, and you don't even need to declare it. But if you do want all that data, you do have to set it to true. And that's what enables us to make this unit test function for our class today.
And one more note about see all data. Even though you use see all data and you actually have access to the data that's in your org, anything that you do within a test class gets rolled back. It means nothing gets actually committed to the database. So even if we were to query an account and change the name and do an update or insert of a new account, nothing will actually be saved in the database after your test runs. So just a very important thing to understand about it.
Yeah, that is really, really important to note. So you can get away with doing it. It's safe from a data perspective, but not so good to do from a
very
coding
bad practice.
perspective. But because we have that on here, when I start to use some of these queries here in Apex, I am able to get some accounts back. I didn't have to pre-populate anything. They're already there in my developer edition org. And if I go ahead and click Run Test, make sure that before we start changing things, everything is working. All right, we get the good green check that so far everything in this test is passing. So we start off with something that we've already seen a couple of times, that we are populating a list of accounts directly from a query. And because we have that list, we can start using our list methods like size, or just debugging it directly. And if we pop over to our logs and pop that one open, I'll go ahead and click on debug, and we can see that first one for the size was 12, and then we start to see a list here of all of the accounts that were returned by that query. Close a few windows here to keep it clean. And then I have a line commented out here to demonstrate that if I try and use Apex to return a field from accounts that's not in my query, that it will not work. So as soon as I attempt to do this and run it, I can see here in my logs I'm getting a status that something went wrong. On the test, there's a angry red X, and that's because if I click this open and see if I can find that error, looks like I'll have to scroll through to get to that error. There it was. Just saw it. Come back here. I get this error that says the SObject row was retrieved via SOQL without querying the requested field, account.name. So once you start working with Apex, you need to be very consistent about ensuring that if you need a field, you ask for it. ID is the only one you get for free every time in your queries. So here we have another example where we do get that right, and we had already queried that along with phone and billing state, so we could substitute any of those in and still be getting the data back that we need.
Don't forget to comment back 8, line 8.
Right, that'll keep failing. There we go. All right. Okay, so then in this next one, this is a demonstration that even though we don't have ID in our select list of fields, we are able to get that particular field from the list of contacts. We're just using our index notation there to get the first item in that list and getting the ID for it. Let's see, that was line 17. Let's pop over here and just confirm that. So instead of using debug, I will try to use
open square bracket.
That, and I think I had that was the broken.
Oh, you had the bad one.
Yeah. There we go, line 17. There it is, debug, and I get that ID value back. You'll also notice I used a trick here that pushes that a debug statement way over to the right to make it a little easier to find. Back here in my code, I did that by adding that text in my debug and then concatenating the value that I wanted onto the end of that. It's kind of a useful trick when you need to scroll through your logs quickly to find something. So up to now, we've looked at setting the list up to return from the results from a SOQL query. But a really good practice to get into is using a map instead, because maps give us a lot more power in Apex. And it's not too tricky to have that work. So as we can see here, I'm setting up a map of IDs and accounts. So the key is going to be the ID, and the value is going to be the entire account record. And I give it a name of account map 1. and I go through my typical sequence here of saying it's a new map and repeating the data types. And then in parentheses and in a pair of square brackets, I put my query. And essentially what we're doing, although it's a little unclear just from the syntax, but we're using a technique called casting. And casting is a technique in programming languages of converting one data type to another. In this case, we are casting the list that is returned by the SOQL query directly into a map. I've showed a few other examples of casting. If you think back to the data types, we did some casting between the different number types. But this is one that you'll probably also want to use in your Apex because it's a very effective way to get a map that will be useful in Apex. And
one comment about casting lists into maps is that you can only cast an ID to an object, meaning if you query a list of records, and you can cast that list into a map of ID to that type of object. And the record ID will always get casted into the key set with the object record into the value. But there are going to be a lot of other scenarios where you want the key to be something else. And for that, you have to use some other tricks that we'll go over in one of the next upcoming sessions.
Right. We'll see, like you can do it with for loops, and all of a sudden you end up with a lot of lines of code to get this result. So for the common scenario of wanting an ID and an object as your key value pair in a map, this technique of casting is a nice, efficient way to do that. And we're looking at the debug output from that query. And we can see our key value pairs getting built up here. I'll see if I can make that a little easier to read. No, not very much. But if we were to, I'll highlight our first item here, and that is that ID, and that's the key, and then it says equals, and then we have an entire account record. So in this case, we just got, again, the ID and the account name. But if we had added other fields, those would all be stacked up behind the name, separated by commas to give us all of the fields we got in our select query. And we take a look at instead of doing it with ID and account, we look at doing it with contacts. Now here, I'm making a reference to a list that I did a little earlier, this list up here. So rather than putting my query in, I'm able to just use a previously retrieved query to directly populate this new map that I have. And I show side by side here essentially the same process, one using a previously referenced list and one using the query directly in it. If we take a look over at our debug log, we can see that both of those have returned pretty much the same data set. Perhaps in a different order. It looks like I might have ordered my fields differently, but ultimately I'd be able to work with it in the same manner because that data is in there and maps are not indexed, so they're not treated the same way when you're working through them. All right, so now we've been talking about maps, and maps, they're so important, and they're really difficult to build and to work with. Why the heck would I use them if lists are so much easier to write? Well, one of the really easy mistakes to make as you start to write triggers is that you'll have a bunch of different things. Imagine a half dozen different workflows. And you can essentially convert workflows into separate chunks of code in your trigger to do different updates. Now workflows, Salesforce makes them very reliable. If you have workflows that happen to update the same record, they're not going to get in each other's way. However, in a trigger, if you have things that are updating records and you do multiple updates in there, think of like workflow field updates, you could end up negating previous updates in the transaction if you're just using a list to do all of the updates. Whereas when you use a map, you are able to control that much more distinctly and ensure that all of the updates that you've built up in your trigger are all honored, and at the end of that transaction, each one of them has done exactly what you expected it to do. So using maps from the get-go, as we'll see when we work with our triggers, is a way to avoid that. And I think I have set up an example here that demonstrates just this hazard here. So let's see if I can get this to work the way I designed it. So I'll run through what we've got set up here, and then we'll take a look at the results. So I start with a list of accounts, and I get some fields back from it. And now I build a second list. And as you can see from its name, this is a list of records that I intend to update, that I'm going to make some changes to the field values. And there might be some logic preceding this that goes through some conditions to make sure that I know which record, but I skipped all of that, and we're just going to say, from that initial query, get the first record at index 0, and we're going to set the type field on that record to a new value of retailing. And I add that to my second list of records to update. So here we're starting to get a little preview of what we'll be doing with our Apex triggers and classes when we start to do updates and other changes to records. But by adding it to this list, I'm sort of setting it aside and saying I'm eventually going to make this update and change the type field to retailing. And then I have, say, some other logic that needs to change the rating on the very same record. And I set that rating to super hot. And I put that particular record into my list of accounts to be updated. So now I've tried to set up two updates on entirely different fields to this particular record. If we were doing this with workflow, we would expect that we would get both of those values back, that type would equal retailing and rating would equal super hot. However, once we take a look in our debugs, we'll see that not everything that we planned works out the way we wanted. So I'm going to switch over to the debug log here, and we'll take a look at the statement of what we've got so far saved up in memory before this transaction completes. So let's see. This is lines 37 through 44. So we'll go ahead and start on line 37. Oh, and I'm just going to highlight that. Turn that filter off, and that drops me right where we want to be, so we can start looking through our debug logs a little bit. So here we can see how the debug logs tell us that a field was changed. This is a convention that is referring to this record. And it's very abstract, but we can see a little more clearly, well, we have the type field and a new value of retailing.
Look, you might want to tweak back the debug. You could still look at only debug from 37.
I think I want to keep it like this because I also wanted to see that we here's where we're setting the rating field to super hot. And then we have a couple more lines of things that are not so interesting. But here, we're doing a debug now to see that, well, we've set type to retailing and rating to super hot. So far everything looks good. That's what we wanted. That's what's in our memory at this point.
Look, would you please pause for a second because it looks like your screen is frozen again.
Okay.
Let's let it catch up. It's doing a very slow refresh kind of deal. Okay, I think we're good now.
All right. So what we are ultimately trying to get to, though, is here on line 46. This is where things have become problematic. So because we did these two updates, we did one that set the field to retailing, and we put it into our list of accounts to update. Then we did another one that set the rating field to super hot, and we put that into our list of accounts to update. Here on line 46, I've debugged that list of accounts to update. And if we look at the IDs, we see that there is the same ID twice in this particular list. And when we go to update it, it's going to fail because it's going to see that same ID, and it's not going to allow us to have the same record updated twice in an update call. This is a situation that's really easy to set up in a long trigger, and the way you can avoid that is instead of using lists for updating, it's using maps. So let's see how that is done. And actually, I even set up an update here so we can see exactly what Apex will tell us when we try and run this test. So we saw that this account list to update had the same record in it twice because we added it first on line 38 and then again on line 42. Lists do not enforce uniqueness. That's a power of sets. And so when I run this, I can see in my status here, but a little more easily, I should be able to see this here from my test results. It tells me that there's a duplicate ID in the list. So let's see how we do a better job of making sure that we don't end up in that situation. So on line 53, we're basically setting up the exact same behavior, but instead of using a list, now we're using a map. I've called this account map to update, and I've made a map of IDs to accounts. And I'm going to use the exact same accounts from my initial query. Those are the ones contained in account list. And I'm going to use the same record, the record at index 0. Just for a bit of differentiation, I'm setting a different value for the type field and a different value for the rating. But now, instead of adding to a list, I'm using this put to put this record into our map. Because it's a map and it expects an ID for the key and an account record for the value, I have to get a little more complex here. So I have to first say, get the record from account list at index 0 and get its ID. So here I'm using my dot notation to tell Apex that I'm working with the account record at index 0 and specifically its ID field. Then in the second half for the value, I can just say, get the whole record, put that whole record in there. And because I had already done the update, that type equals mineral extraction is now going to be saved in my account map to update. And it's just being saved in memory. It's not actually being committed to the database at this point. It's just on deck for eventual commit to the database. And then I do the same thing for that account records rating field. Now I'm setting it to a value of heavy. And once again, I use my put to put that into our map. And so that we can see what we have in memory, not yet committed, here on line 67, we'll flip over to our logs again. Let's see if we can go directly there. Or I like Ohad's idea. Let's go directly to debug only. And so now I can see that here's the account map, and it just has one record in it. It's not like that list I was working with earlier that had the same record in it twice. Because we're working with the keys, and keys are sets, that uniqueness is enforced, and that way we know that we've only put that same record into the map once, although all of its updates are honored. Go back over here. I think I probably need to comment out this update if we want anything to work right. And I have my update statement here. And here, update is essentially a way of telling the database, save this, save what's in memory. And I'm specifically telling it to use the list of accounts, that is the values portion of our map. And if you want to think of like how this would appear in the interface, if you imagine the edit page when you're working with a record, you can change all sort of fields in there, but until you hit save, none of that data is committed. It remembers it because it's all there on the page in front of you, and this update call is the equivalent of the save button on an edit page. So that's what actually commits that change to the database. And of course kicks off any workflow and validation rules, and all of that applies in Apex as well. But specifically here we are just updating those couple of fields. All right, so that's a good chance, a good place to take a moment to check and see if there are any questions that have come up, or if Ohad has caught any good chat that we want to put in front of everybody.
There weren't any additional questions recently. So this is the opportunity, by the way, to stop, think about what you've seen so far, and think if you have any questions. Please let us know you guys are still alive. That would be nice as well. I did want to mention something, and please stop me if you think I'm confusing too much. I don't want to jump ahead, but I feel it might be worth mentioning it. Right now, if you scroll up just a little bit so we can see the two put methods. Right now, what's happening here is that we are actually putting the same account in the map twice. And the reality, what happens in the second time, it doesn't actually do anything. The account is already on that list. It doesn't put it in there anymore. The reason that Luke showed this is many times you will actually end up processing the same records in different parts of your code. And so you may not realize that you put it there before and decide to put it there in another part of the code. There's actually more efficient patterns. I'm not going to get into that. But another thing that is important to understand is that we are looking at the same record that is in memory from two different places. One is the list, the ACCT list, and the other is the map. Once we add the list record to the map, they're actually bound together. It doesn't have two copies of that account in memory. It's the same record in the memory, and it's just referenced from two different places. One is the list, and one is the map. And so whichever one you decide to use to perform any kind of update, you don't actually have to put it again or to add it to the list again to make the changes. So in other words, once we put the account in the map in line 59, when we make changes in line 62 to the same account, it already makes the change will already be apparent even before we perform line 65. So if you add a debug statement before line 65 for the account in the map, you will actually see those values. So it's not actually necessary to keep adding something to a map every time you make a change to it through a list. But there are definitely scenarios where you might do that, and it doesn't hurt to use a map. Actually, map is the only way we can do this without causing the issue that Luke showed before with the duplicate values.
And this is pretty much what Salesforce is doing with workflow field updates. As it encounters each update that qualifies for a record, it is just building up a map of all of those records, all of their updates, and then just saving them as one big final save at the very end of all of that processing of the workflows. And in fact, you can even see that if you really dig into the logs. You can see where there's a portion where you can see all of the workflows being evaluated. Those that qualify as true eventually get passed down then to another section of the logs where all of those workflows are then processed together, and one final update is done based on all of the workflows. So it really is an efficient way to make those updates with as little processing time. And that's what helps all of us to have a speedy experience on our multi-tenant Salesforce cloud. And the other aspect, here we're only working with one record, but typically in Salesforce and in Apex, you're working with hundreds or thousands of records, and then it gets really difficult to keep track of which ones you've added to a list and which ones you haven't. So using maps is an effective way to ensure that the records are only in there once when there's just no reasonable way to keep track of them otherwise, or to even predict how many records are going to be coming through any given insert or update. So to this point, we've really only looked at querying against one table. But as you can imagine from using reports, we often want to be getting values from a couple tables. So our next example here is looking at a query that is getting data from both the account and the contacts. So to give you a more familiar view, I'm going to go back over to the interface and go to my report here. And when I run this report, let me clear away those filters here. So we're using a standard accounts and contacts, and we're getting the first name and last name of each contact, and we're getting their account name. And we can see that there are duplicate account names here. So that is the same account, but there's a different contact at each one. So we really have two tables that we're pulling information from. And the way that that works in SOQL is to embed additional queries within our query. So we start here with an outer query, and I'll clean this up just so we can see that outer query first, where we're just selecting the name from account. But now if we want to get the contacts for all of those accounts, we can drop an inner query into that. And this is now going to get all of the accounts, and then it's going to get all of the contacts at those accounts and the first and last name for the contacts. And this is kind of going back to what we looked at earlier with collections, where we end up having a list of lists. We've got a list of all of our accounts, and then for each of those accounts, we've got a list of all of its contacts. And that's where we start getting into that necessity to make multiple references to the indexes. So we can see here on line 74, I am using multiple references. First, I reference the account at index 0, and then using my dot notation to drill deeper in, I say get the contact at index 0 from that account, and then using dot notation, get the first name of that contact in that account. So the same techniques we were using with lists that we created arbitrarily in Apex and populated with some values, now we're doing that same thing but based on the results of a query. And if we look at our debug log at line 74, we can see that we must have gotten the contact back named Edna. So we were able to drill very deeply into what's a much bigger list of data. And in fact, let's take a look at what that would, oh, there on line 75. I already did. So on line 75, I have the entire output. And this is probably going to scroll over many, many, many lines. We can see accounts here. This is probably really miserable to see on a slowly refreshing monitor, so I'm going to just do one quick zing over to the end and show that because this query is so big, the debug log at some point eventually just says, forget it, I'm not showing you anymore, and it just gives us an ellipsis to say, there's more data, but you can't see it. But this is also where Workbench can come in very handy.
Kurt, sorry, look, I'd like to point out something here. And in the debug log, if you don't mind switching back for a second, what you can see here is that you actually got the account name, and of course the ID got tagged along because we didn't specify that. But where is that list of contacts that we queried? The interesting thing is that a sublist or a select query, inner select query, does not get shown in the debug log when you ask it to show you the entire list. So in order to see it in the debug log, and we'll see it in a moment, you actually have to query specifically for the inner list.
Right. And we can see some similar behavior if we drop this same query into, I don't even think it'll run in our query editor. I think query editor might balk. Nope, it gives it. And so here it does a sort of curious compound return. So in our first column, it gives the account name, but then in the second column, it's actually not just returning one contact at a time, but it returns all of the contacts associated with that. And we can see our somewhat similar pattern of brackets here to show that this is a large list with some items inside of it. And Workbench is also very good for working on these kind of queries. And I bet my Workbench is timed out, so we'll see if I can. Oh, no, actually, it's still timed in. If you want to do these type of queries in Workbench, these compound queries or relationship queries, you actually have to enable that. You have to allow SOQL parent relationship queries. Otherwise, it's just going to only let you work one table at a time. So let's apply those settings. Sajian just reported that he's not able to hear. Can others hear me? Do we have a global problem or a single one
I
here.
can hear you. Yeah, Jennifer can hear you. I think it's his problem. I'll respond to him.
Thanks, everyone, for giving the confirmation. Sajian, you might want to dial back in.
Yeah, if he can't hear you.
He can't hear me. Yeah, I know. I'm guessing he'll figure that out.
Well, I'm responding directly to him.
Thank you. All right, let me get myself over to the query panel here and copy that query in. And this is a good spot for a matrix. Nope, probably not going to let me do it.
Michael asked if you have to do this every single time that you log in. Do you know the answer to that?
No, you do not. Once you set it, it will remember it. I imagine if you clear your cookies, it will probably lose it and forget it, but at least, well, I'm guessing it would. I don't want to clear my cookies and find out now, but if you experiment with it, do let us know. So we can see here that Workbench gives a slightly friendlier output. It does some basic HTML tabling for that same type of query to show us where there are multiple contacts for one account. So in this case, we've been looking at a report of accounts and all of the contacts at it. But we can also flip this relationship query on its head, and instead of doing this from the account, we can start from contacts. So we can start by saying, just get me the first name and last name of all the contacts. But if we were to look at the same thing here in the builder, let's see, go to contact. And we know that we want to get our account name. If we use the builder to do that, all it's going to give us is account ID. And we can type in our first name and last name. But Query Builder on its own is not going to offer us the parent account fields. It's just going to offer us that account ID because really that's all that exists directly on the contact table. But we can, when we're working with a child record or a child object like contact, we can use our dot notation to go up to the parent record and get fields from it. So I've done account.name, and now when I do the query, I get a more flattened table than what we saw before because this is listing all of the contacts and their specific accounts. So I get some duplicates over here. So working with our queries, you have these two directions, one of going from the parent and getting child records associated with it, or going from the child and using dot notation to reference the fields on the parent record.
Look, another way to look at it is this. If you have a list of, if you work with an object that has children, right, like contacts are children of accounts, you have the only way to get, if you query accounts, the only way to get the contacts would be to use a sub-query, an inner query. But if you're looking at any object and you're looking at any of the lookups on that object, if you just type account, an account is a little unique, that's why you have to write account ID, but for any other lookup, if you have a custom lookup, let's say from account to case, for example, you know, the case lookup field you created, every custom field is always, the API name is always followed by __C. But because it's a lookup, you can actually go into the lookup and say, okay, show me that case number or the case subject. And the way that you'll do it is by writing the lookup field's API name. So if it's a standard field, it will just be account, or in this case, account ID. I'm sorry, account actually. But if it's a custom field, you will actually replace the C, which stands for custom object, with an R, which stands for a relationship. So you would actually write the custom lookup field. So let's say case underscore underscore R dot subject. So everything that is a lookup field on the object, you can look into it by using the dot notation. Everything that is children, and you may have many children, you have to use an inner select statement.
I was checking to see if we have any custom objects in Developer Edition, but they've never really done that, so we don't have a good example.
Oh, you could create a custom lookup from account to case, for example, to demonstrate that.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, we could add in one. But we do have a few other variations we want to discuss here, and we'll get plenty of practice with these type of queries as we start getting into our triggers and loops and have to navigate through that. We've got a few examples here of some other variations, some more complex filters coming up. And Ohad generously contributed his time to build these, so I will also ask him to generously go ahead and explain these. Hopefully I'll drive well while he's explaining these.
I'm sure you will. Okay, so we've already done an example of account with contact, so we'll use a very similar example, and we're creating a list for account and cases. And we're basically using the same exact format we used before. In this case, I'm querying the select statement is select ID and name. And then I have an inner select statement that is calling for ID, subject, and contact ID from cases. Now, I could actually replace contact ID with contact.name also if we want it to be a little bit more readable. There's one thing that's kind of important to notice, and I didn't say anything earlier, but I think now is the time. If you've noticed before, look, do you mind scrolling up a little bit to the more to the top, a little further up to the query where you have query from contact? There you go. I think yeah, that's fine, line 15. So look at what line 15 is saying. It's saying select department mobile phone is related from contact. And contact is the object name that we want to query from. But if we scroll down back to line 70 or ish, wherever it was here we actually say from contacts, and we use the plural form. Now, actually saying we're using the plural form is not correct. Whenever you do an inner query, you have to use the relationship name of that object. So if you've ever created a lookup field as an administrator, and so you gave the lookup field a name, and after you give it a name, it asks you how do you want to name the relationship on the target object, on the parent. Right? So if we created a lookup from account to case, that actually make account a child of case, and it's asking you what you want to name the relationship on cases. So when you look at the related list on cases, that will be the title of that related list. That name is how you need to query from an inner select statement. So you're not actually using the object name you want to query from. You are specifying the relationship name. So I hope that was clear. But now you can go a little bit down again to my section. So the same thing with cases, right? Normally when you query from cases, you'll use from case, which is the object name. But in this case, the relationship name for cases on the account is cases. And so I don't think I have anything following the account, right? To the right, I'm not sure how further line 80 goes. Okay, so we actually do have a like statement. So I have a where statement. When I say where name is like, and like is basically contains, right? So you use percentage sign as a wildcard, and I say basically anything can be before the word United and anything could be after the word United. If I removed percentage on any side of that word, it would only, so if I removed, for example, the first percentage, the string has to start with United and can have anything afterwards. If I left the first one and deleted the second one, the string can start with anything but has to finish the last characters on that string has to end with United. But let's leave both of these in for now. In this case, you can see that because I'm using a like, I actually have to specify the same twice. I'm saying name is like United or name is like Tycho. And I'm even using the order by name, and I'm telling it to order it descending. So it starts with Z and goes down to A. Scroll back to the left, look.
And one thing I'll mention here, the name that it is referring to is going to be the account name. Even though we've also got the contact name referenced here, it's going to keep those queries distinct, and it's going to honor that outer query's name from the account records.
Yeah, that's a very good point. In fact, we can even add where statement inside the inner query. So I can say where case, where the case name. So where case.name or where contact, I'm sorry, yeah, with case. You don't need to use case.name because it's in case, but where name equals whatever. Actually, there's no name on case. There's just subject. But we can absolutely do a where clause and even order and limit on the inner statement as well. Okay, let's look at it. All I have afterwards is a system debug that shows us how many accounts we queried. I think the result would be 4 accounts that meet this criteria on the developer edition.
I got 3 from mine.
3, okay.
Something.
Yep. Yeah, it might be. And go back to my code, please. The next statement, you'll see when I try to query just the accounts in line 83, we'll see what I already pointed before is that you only see the account information, the account fields, but you will not see any of the cases, even though we specifically queried for them, right? But that doesn't mean, just because they don't show in the debug statement, doesn't mean they're not there. If we go to the next one, I'm going to ask the debug statement to show me the list of cases under the third account, the account at index number 2. So hopefully there are some values in this one. And there are. So it actually shows you that there are 7 cases on the account in line 86. And in line 87, we're actually showing the cases. So for a debug statement, you have to specifically ask it to show you that list for a specific account. When we start going into loops and fun things like that, we'll see there's a lot of other ways to handle that. So another thing is, just like Luke showed us on the Workbench, we are able to also query things a little differently, right? So in line 91, I'm just querying the accounts without the cases. So exactly the same statement, the same select statement, but I just removed the inner select statement for cases. In line 92, this will be all of the cases in the organization, right? Because right now I have nothing that tells it to only look for cases where the account is one of the accounts queried above. I can do this also by saying in line 95, I'm only getting the cases for the first account. So in this case, I have a select statement from case, and you see, by the way, that I use the object name case and not cases here, because this is not an inner statement. And I'm basically just querying for some values from the case object, and I'm giving it a where clause, and I say where the account ID is in the list of accounts at account 2 in this case. Or equals, I'm sorry, not in. Equals to the ID of the third account, the account in index number 2. And so hopefully there are some cases for that one, and it should show us something in line 96 on the debug. It did. So we actually see that 86 and 96 show us the same cases and the same number of cases, but we just queried them for a little bit in a little bit of a different way. Now, which one you will use really depends on what you're trying to do with the information you query. A lot of times you'll want to query a bunch of records and a bunch of other unrelated records, and then do some logic and find which ones matches which one. And a lot of times you will want to actually query them as a one query and get all the information at once. It really depends what you want to do with it. And one of the important things is to keep in mind is something that we've kind of mentioned in the first session. We haven't really talked about it since then. And that is when we bring up governor limits. So all of you as admins are familiar with some governor limits. We talked about some of the other ones in the first session. One of the governor limits is how many SQL queries you are able to perform within one context. And so in order to minimize the number of queries are you there?
We're here.
Okay, sorry. My headset is about to die, so if I disappear suddenly, you'll know why. In order to minimize the number of queries, you always want to write the most efficient queries to get the data that you need within the minimal amount of SQL queries. Sometimes the answer is to use inner queries, and sometimes you just can't because of how you want to use the data. So I think that's all I had to say about that, and unless you have any comments, Luke, or any questions from anybody out there.
I just wanted to point out that as we had looked at earlier, when we use this colon, that's a way of telling Apex that what's going to follow is a variable that we declared earlier. In this case, it is the ID of a particular account, but it could also be a list of accounts. And you get a lot of functionality by using a variable built into your queries. And we will get to see a lot more of that as we go into for loops next week and triggers in the session after that. And our next session is going to be a week from Thursday, trying to get one in before I go on a 2-week vacation. So I will get the invites out for that for loops and other control flow elements out to everybody. And certainly if there are any questions you have, feel free to email us, or if you have any questions right now, speak up or chat up, and we'll see if we can answer them. And I want to thank Ohad, as always, for joining us. And I also wanted to spotlight Ohad's new blog, force.cloud. He got a cool .cloud TLD for his blog, so be sure to check that out. And I'll be sending out a follow-up email and the recording, or at least the recording of most of this, from the point at which Dan so helpfully reminded me to record the session, along with a survey to get a little feedback about what we can do better. This particular session was very light on any practice in SOQL, so we'll make sure we include some of that in our future worksheets so you get to practice some SOQL. And with that, I thank everyone for joining tonight, and I look forward to seeing, or at least hearing you all in 9 days' time for control flow in Apex. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ohad, and have a good night.
Thank you.